I'm your host सलीम बिन मोहम्मद रफ़ी और ये है मेरी YouTube channel. Today I'm just going to talk about 3 steps which when take the Netanyahu, the criminal, the war criminal, the man who is got to be arrested anywhere he lands, and even he cannot breathe now freely in the air, along with all the supporters, his war cabinet, his war council, his chief of army staff, his defense minister, along with his friends, the bosom friends, Joey, the Sleepy Joe, the American president, and along with all the members of Apex who pay for his elections ever since he was born, and all the Democrats and all the Republicans who have been just the vampires and who've been sucking, and they are the most corrupt and the most blackened face people, and you can see the signatures of those 12 senators daring to write to the ICC that we will do this and that to you. Nonsense, you damn it. Who are you? You should be booked, and none of you should be able to land in any Arab country, in any Muslim country, or any European country with their conscience and with the human rights. You are all war criminals. All of you are threatening, and those who are supporting that. And I am now directing this towards the British and the meanest and the worst and the dirtiest people on earth. See that the flights they've been having over Gaza to provide the surveillance by their drones, which have been flying on the pretext that they are looking for their own 2 hostages. And in fact, they were providing all the movements of all the civilians on that pretext, all that deaths, all that decomposed bodies which have been recovered from mass graves in the Al-Shifa hospital, in the other healthcare centers of whole of South and North Gaza and now Rafah. And you can see the dirt and filth of these Europeans who have created this illegitimate child who has taken the peace of the whole world, one man against the whole world, and nobody can come. The one person who talked about peace was killed in a second, assassinated, even I think within the 48 hours, and the whole nation of the Zionists laughed and smiled and let him loose free, and he is walking free in Israel somewhere, still alive, and nobody killed him, nobody punished him, nobody put him behind the bars till he dies. But this rascal, this menace, this scum of the society lives on. He doesn't die a natural death. He did all the corruption, and he is required in his own home, the Zionists, and that movement which he has created, and with that pretext he considered hundreds and thousands of people without limbs. I saw the girl with hardly she is 8 years old with lost her one arm, and she says, when I want to get my arm back, and she is crying, and no one can see the innocence of the girl and their tears. And see the girl whose leg been amputated and sitting on the wheelchair, she said, I don't want to get down, please Baba, let my leg back, I want that. And these bastards, these rascals, these son of a bitch, these people who I think you took this away from these little innocent children and were carrying no guns, they were no Hamas, they were no terrorists, they were already innocent children. And the other victim of these people have been the women. So women and children are the one only you can, the so-called IDF, the best army of the world, you are the most coward, you transgender khuzras, you did it and you will suffer. I tell you, I give you 3 steps which are going to happen to you. The areas you occupied, first of all, you are going to be thrown out of the Golan Heights, and that's what should be the target 1 of Hezbollah, of Hamas and Iran to get that, and Syria and Iraq and Russia to get those back. Once you get those heights back, then they will psychologically, you will see that the trembling legs of these Jews who are now boasting and talking rubbish and nonsense, although beaten up by their own public, taken, put behind the tires of the cars. You see the minister, how he called the police, and look at the Netanyahu trembling and urinating in his bed, and see that covered, and then and the straight face is trying to, so that he doesn't go to jail for all the corruption he did, and the wife who got carpets and gold and kept hundreds and thousands of things, and the money he siphoned and paid to the publisher of that newspaper, who just kept and promised that Noni and Bibi married together. These homosexuals, damn hell, these people, the menace should not have any. I think they have the right. They are not normal, and they should not be part of the international body, because they don't respect international law, and they should not be acceptable to the whole international body. And this is the end of Israel. And after that, all that land of those Shiva forms, I think Lebanon should get that back. Once these two are taken back, then all that areas which 1967 they got from Palestine should be taken back step by step. Once it is done, psychologically you will see there will be exodus of the remaining Jews, all the settlers, all the people, and you will have few thousands Jews left, and then let them live in Palestine as one state.
Now let's talk about another crisis, the crisis that Israel's Prime Minister finds himself in. Benjamin Netanyahu is facing heat from all sides. From the people of Israel, from his own government, from the US, and even from the International Criminal Court. Everywhere he turns, the daggers are out. His options are limited. On the domestic front, he is choosing to defy the people of Israel. They've accused him of failing the hostages. Hamas captured more than 250 Israelis and took them into Gaza. This was during the October 7th attack. About 130 hostages have not been returned. Some have died during the fighting, but about 100 are still with Hamas. Their families obviously want them returned, and they blame Netanyahu for failing to do this.
Families of the hostages, we are gathered to call upon the cabinet members, get out of government if you can't secure a hostage deal now.
Hands painted red are a common sign in Israel now. Protests against the Prime Minister keep taking place regularly. Over half of Israel's population wants him to resign immediately. About 58% of those polled, they want him to resign. 28% of the people who voted for Netanyahu during the election also want him to step down, which means he has lost over a quarter of his supporters. If he resigns, he may never get another shot. This could be his last stint as Prime Minister of Israel, so he's doing everything he can to prolong this term, even bowing down to his coalition partners. You see, Netanyahu did not win the 2022 election outright. The parliament in Israel has 120 seats, the Knesset, 120 seats, and the Prime Minister's Likud party has only 32 of these seats. He is in power because of a coalition government, a coalition that includes people like this.
If you decide to raise a white flag and cancel the order to occupy Rafah immediately, in order to complete the task of destroying Hamas and to restore security to the residents of the South and to the citizens of Israel, and to return all our abducted brothers and sisters to their homes, the government headed by you will have no right to exist.
That's Bezalel Smotrich. He's one of Netanyahu's coalition partners. He's threatening to oust the Prime Minister if he does not attack the city of Rafah. That's the last refuge for Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Another hardline coalition partner is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He put up this reminder on Sunday. It roughly translates to an irresponsible deal equals to the government's dissolution. He's talking about the ongoing hostage negotiations with Hamas, the deal that protesting citizens want Netanyahu to take, but his cabinet colleagues want him to reject. So the Prime Minister is caught between the devil and the deep blue sea. He cannot be forced to resign, but his coalition can dissolve the government, which is why Netanyahu has declared that he will invade Rafah. Regardless of a ceasefire deal, he will invade. He's choosing to stay in power despite the will of the Israeli people. He's willing to destroy the last city still standing in Gaza to appease his hardline coalition. But by doing this, he risks angering Israel's biggest foreign backer, the United States of America. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Israel. He met the Prime Minister today. The U.S. has drawn a red line around Rafah. It wants a concrete plan to keep civilians safe. Until that happens, it won't support any Israeli operation there. But will Netanyahu listen? at a time when he needs more help from the US because he faces another external problem: the International Criminal Court. The ICC is a court based in the Netherlands, in The Hague. It investigates genocides, crimes against humanity, and war crimes, and it has issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin in the past. That was last year. Now, the same ICC plans to do this with Netanyahu, issue an arrest warrant.
You have to hear this to believe this. The International Criminal Court in The Hague is contemplating issuing arrest warrants against senior Israeli government and military officials as war criminals. This would be an outrage of historic proportions.
The warrants may come as soon as this week. What does this actually mean? Will the court arrest Netanyahu? Will they haul him to the Netherlands in chains? Well, that won't happen. The ICC does not have a police force to do that. And Israel, like Russia, does not recognize the International Criminal Court. So Israel is under no obligation to arrest Netanyahu for the ICC, even if there's an arrest warrant against him. That's the case in Israel and all the other countries that do not recognize this court. But 124 countries in the world do recognize this court, and they will have to arrest Netanyahu if he ever visits, which means the Israeli Prime Minister's movements will become limited. He will only be safe if he avoids most countries in the world. If the ICC issues the warrant, it will be a major inconvenience for him. And more than that, really, it will be a statement that Netanyahu's actions in Gaza are similar to Putin's actions in Ukraine. That won't be a good look, and it explains Netanyahu's outburst.
Israel expects the leaders of the free world to stand firmly against the ICC outrageous assault on Israel's inherent right of self-defense. We expect them to use all the means at their disposal to stop this dangerous move.
He's talking about the US here. He wants Washington to help him, and they are doing so. The US does not recognize the ICC either, and they don't support its case against Netanyahu. So Washington is behind him, at least for now, at least until he toes the American line. As you can see, Netanyahu is surrounded. He's facing opposition from every side. One wrong move, and it could be over.
Britain's Royal Air Force has flown 200 spy flights over Gaza since December, recording around 1,000 hours of surveillance, supposedly to release hostages. But throughout this time, they must have witnessed atrocious war crimes being committed on the ground by Israel's military. I'm joined now by my colleague Matt Kennard, who's been doing this investigation.
Thanks for having me, Phil.
Matt, this is something that you've been monitoring for months now, but to see it reach this scale of 200 flights and what we estimate to be 1,000 hours of surveillance footage, I mean, it's deeply troubling, isn't it? Especially when we think that the International Criminal Court might be about to issue indictments against Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yes, extremely worrying. And also, I should say that the story out today about the 200 flights, that's information that the Ministry of Defence has withheld from the public. I have asked, and MPs have actually asked as well, about how many spy flights there have been over Gaza since December, and they've refused to give it. So I had to independently reconstruct a timeline of those flights. So obviously they didn't want the quantity to get out. And it's shocking because it's well over one flight a day, 1.3, I think, average flights a day over the past 5 months. Now, the British government say, well, these flights started to help Israel locate hostages. And the British hostages, there's 2 British hostages out of the total of 132 still thought to be held by Hamas. So why do you need often 2 surveillance flights a day to find just 2 hostages? These are 6-hour flights as well. The planes are in the sky for 6 hours. Also, think about Israel's control of the Gaza Strip. They have complete surveillance control of the Strip. They're also on the ground in the Gaza Strip. So the idea that these planes, which are called Shadow R1 planes, can help the Israelis in ways that they can't help themselves is bizarre to me. So to be honest with you, I believe there's a whole nother story, and the government is refusing to also give us information about how what intelligence is being shared with Israel. So there's many red flags about what this operation, this spying operation by the British military is really about.
Yeah, and one of the striking things in your article, Matt, is the fact that there was one of these spy flights in the air the day that the British aid workers the 3 British aid workers were murdered by Israel. Not just on the same day, but it looks like actually at the time that the airstrikes happened. So that obviously raises questions about whether they have any footage relevant to the murder of those 3 British military veterans and all the other aid workers, of course, that were killed. And although the IDF has done this investigation, it hasn't released the full footage from the incident. So perhaps the RAF surveillance footage could shed more light on what really happened. Another thing that you found, Matt, was that one of these flights has actually landed at Nevatim Air Force Base, which is one of the major Israeli Air Force bases. I think that was back in February.
Yeah, on your first point about what these spy planes may have seen in Gaza, well, they've witnessed daily war crimes. There's huge amount of importance to the footage that the British have got from over Gaza, because not only is the ICC rumored to be issuing arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and his ministers, there's also the chance that they could issue arrest warrants for British ministers. So we need to see what that footage is. Also, the Israelis obviously aren't going to release footage that makes them look culpable. So the British footage takes on even more importance. And an MP did ask last week whether they would share the footage with the ICC if requested, and the British government refused to even say if they would. They said merely, we only collect intelligence for hostage rescue, but of course they collect all sorts of intelligence when they're over there that relates to other things. So and that becomes even more important when you're talking about the assassination of 3 British aid workers by Israel. And as you say, a UK spy plane was in the sky when that happened. That assassination, which was a series of airstrikes, happened on Monday, April 1st, and is thought to have happened soon after 10:30 p.m. A Shadow R1 plane was on its way back to RAF Akrotiri at that time. So it definitely has footage from, it's very likely it has footage from just before the incident. And we need to know what is being done with that footage. The families of those British aid workers killed need to know what's being done with that footage. And we need a whole campaign on the government to release the footage, because I don't think that it's public that many other countries have this kind of evidence of war crimes. This is a hugely important repository of information that must be handed over to the ICC, that must be handed over to the ICJ, and must be handed over to the families of the British aid workers who were killed while British spy planes were in the sky.
Yeah, and on that point about whether this footage is going to be shared with the ICC, this was actually raised back in December, a few days after Grant Shapps announced these flights were taking place. There was a debate in the House of Commons, and I think it was mainly SNP politicians who repeatedly asked Shapps, I think up to 5 times, about whether this footage would be shared with the International Criminal Court if it showed evidence of Israeli troops committing war crimes on the ground. And these are the answers that he gave.
I wonder if he agrees that if any information should come out of those reconnaissance missions which...
यूनिवर्सल टेलीविजन को सब्सक्राइब करना ना भूलें, उसके बाद बेल बटन पे क्लिक करें और अपने कमेंट्स के सेक्शन में अपने कीमती जो ख्यालात का इजहार ज़रूर